Get your hands off me! Becca's voice echoed through Westfield Shopping Center as she stumbled backward, her pregnant belly making her unsteady. But that moment was still hours away. The Saturday had started so perfectly. Rebecca Sullivan Mitchell stretched contentedly as golden morning sunlight streamed through the bedroom windows of her suburban home. At 29 and 7 months pregnant, she finally felt like she was glowing the way everyone said pregnant women should. The difficult first trimester was a distant memory, replaced by this wonderful energy that made her want to nest and prepare for their first child. "John?" she called softly, reaching across the king-sized bed. Her hand found only cool sheets and an indentation where her millionaire husband had been sleeping. The faint scent of his expensive cologne lingered on the pillowcase. From downstairs came the familiar sounds of Jonathan getting ready for another important business day. At 42, he had built Mitchell Development into one of the most successful real estate companies in the state. Becca felt a familiar surge of pride, thinking about how hard he worked to provide for their growing family. She padded downstairs in her silk maternity pajamas, one hand supporting her rounded belly. John stood at the kitchen island in his perfectly pressed navy suit, scrolling through his phone while drinking coffee from his favorite mug. He looked every inch the successful businessman he was, his salt and pepper hair styled perfectly and his jaw clean-shaven. "Good morning, beautiful," he said without looking up from his phone. "You're up early for a Saturday." "The baby's been kicking since 5, Becca said, moving to pour herself a glass of orange juice. "I think she's going to be an early riser like her daddy." John finally glanced up, giving her that charming smile that had won her heart 8 years ago. "Have you decided what you want to do today?" "I've got those meetings with potential investors, but they should wrap up by evening." Becca nodded, used to John's weekend business obligations. Success in real estate required constant networking and relationship building. "I thought I'd go shopping for the baby. Maybe finally pick out some outfits for the nursery photos." "Sounds perfect. Take the credit card and treat yourself to something nice too." John kissed her forehead, his lips barely brushing her skin. "You deserve it." As his BMW pulled out of the driveway, Becca felt that familiar pang of loneliness that came with being married to such an ambitious man. But she pushed it aside. In 3 months, their daughter would arrive, and John would finally have someone else to lavish his attention on, besides his business deals. 2 hours later, Becca stood outside Westfield Shopping Center, admiring its elegant facade. Daniel Sullivan, her estranged uncle, had built this place into the premier shopping destination in the area, though she tried not to think about family drama when she visited. The marble walkways and soaring glass atrium always made her feel sophisticated, like she belonged in this world of luxury that John had introduced her to. The maternity boutique on the second level was exactly what she needed. Soft classical music played while she browsed racks of beautiful nursing dresses and tiny outfits in every pastel shade imaginable. Her kindergarten teacher salary could never have afforded these prices, but John insisted she shop at the best stores now that she was carrying his heir. "You're absolutely glowing," said Linda Parker, the store manager, as Becca held up a beautiful blue dress with hand-smocked details. "When are you due?" "December 15th, Becca said, smoothing the fabric over her belly. "It's our first, so I'm probably going overboard with the shopping. First babies are special. Your husband must be over the moon." Becca's smile faltered slightly. John had been supportive, of course, but he seemed more excited about the business implications than the emotional reality. He talked about legacy and inheritance more than midnight feedings and first smiles. "He's very busy with work right now, but yes, he's thrilled." She purchased the blue dress along with 3 tiny sleepers and a soft yellow blanket that felt like cashmere between her fingers. Walking through the mall's main corridor with her elegant shopping bags, Becca felt like she was living the dream life she had always imagined. Successful husband, beautiful home, baby on the way, and the financial freedom to buy whatever caught her eye. The food court called to her with its array of tempting scents. Pregnancy had given her the strangest cravings, and today she desperately wanted a cinnamon pretzel from the German bakery stand. She ordered the largest size and found a table near the fountain where she could people watch while indulging her craving. Pulling out her phone, she texted her best friend Claire, "Baby shopping success. Found the most gorgeous dress for the hospital photos. Can't wait to show you everything." Claire's response came immediately. living vicariously through your shopping adventures. Marcus is working another double shift, so I'm meal prepping again. Send pictures. Becca smiled, thinking about how different her life had become from Claire's. As a nurse practitioner, Claire worked long hours and worried constantly about money, while Becca had the luxury of spending her Saturday browsing boutiques. Sometimes she felt guilty about the disparity, but John reminded her that she deserved this lifestyle after years of struggling on a teacher's salary. She was taking another bite of her pretzel when she heard it, John's distinctive laugh echoing from across the food court. Her head snapped up, scanning the crowded tables until she spotted him near the Italian restaurant. He was sitting across from a stunning blonde woman Becca had never seen before, leaning forward with an intimacy that made Becca's stomach clench. For a moment, she tried to rationalize what she was seeing. John had mentioned meeting with potential investors. This could be a business lunch that had moved to the food court for some reason. But as she watched, the woman reached across the table and fed John a piece of breadstick, laughing at something he whispered in her ear. Becca's hand instinctively moved to her throat, touching the delicate gold necklace John had given her for their anniversary 6 months ago. Except now she could see that same necklace, or one exactly like it, adorning the throat of the mysterious blonde woman. The same necklace he had told her was custom designed, one of a kind, chosen specifically for her. Her pretzel turned to ash in her mouth as the truth crashed over her like a tidal wave. This wasn't a business meeting. This was her husband, the father of her unborn child, having an intimate lunch with another woman while wearing the jewelry he claimed was made exclusively for his pregnant wife. Becca's hands began to shake as she watched John stroke the woman's fingers, the same gesture he used to make with her before their relationship had cooled into polite coexistence. 7 months pregnant and feeling more vulnerable than she had ever felt in her life, she was discovering that her marriage was built on lies. The blonde woman was everything Becca wasn't right now. Sleek, sophisticated, with the kind of figure that looked perfect in designer clothes. Her hair was salon fresh, her makeup flawless, and when she smiled at John, her teeth were blindingly white. She represented everything Becca had temporarily lost to pregnancy, weight, and swollen ankles, and the constant exhaustion that came with growing another human being. Part of her wanted to flee, to pretend she had never seen this moment that would shatter her comfortable illusions. She could go home, unpack her shopping bags, and wait for John to return with his lies about investor meetings. She could protect her unborn daughter from the trauma of a broken home and keep living in the fantasy that her marriage was solid. But another part of her, the part that had been raised by strong Sullivan women who never backed down from a fight, demanded the truth. She deserved to know who this woman was and how long John had been deceiving her. Her daughter deserved a father who would be honest and faithful, or no father at all. Taking a deep breath that did nothing to calm her racing heart, Becca gathered her shopping bags and stood up from the table. Her legs felt unsteady, whether from pregnancy or shock she couldn't tell, but she forced herself to walk across the food court toward the table where her husband was betraying everything they had built together. With each step, she felt her perfect Saturday crumbling around her, replaced by a nightmare she never could have imagined when she woke up that morning feeling grateful for her blessed life. Becca's heels clicked against the marble floor as she approached John's table, each step feeling like a countdown to the explosion of her carefully constructed world. Her heart hammered against her ribs, and she could feel the baby responding to her stress with sharp kicks that made her pause and breathe deeply. From this closer distance, she could see that the woman was even more beautiful than she had appeared from across the food court. Her blonde hair was styled in an expensive cut that probably cost more than Becca spent on groceries in a month. She wore a cream-colored silk blouse that hugged her perfect figure, and when she laughed at something John said, her whole face lit up with genuine joy. It was the kind of joy Becca realized she hadn't seen on John's face in months, maybe even years. When had he stopped looking at her that way? When had their conversations become limited to household logistics and pregnancy symptoms? As she drew closer, she could hear fragments of their conversation over the general noise of the food court. "Told you how incredible you look in that necklace," John was saying, his voice lower and more intimate than Becca had heard it in ages. "You have exquisite taste," the woman replied, her manicured fingers touching the gold chain at her throat. Though I still can't believe you bought something so expensive just for me. Becca stopped dead in her tracks. Just for her? The necklace that John claimed was a special anniversary gift, chosen because it reminded him of the constellation where they had their first kiss. He had given it to another woman like it was nothing more than a trinket to win her affections. Nothing's too expensive for you, Amber, John said, reaching across the table to take her hand. You know that. Amber. Even her name sounded like something from a romance novel, sophisticated and exotic compared to plain Rebecca, who went by Becca because even her full name felt too formal for a kindergarten teacher from a middle-class family. Becca realized she was standing only 10 feet away from their table, clutching her shopping bags like armor against the emotional assault she was witnessing. Several other diners had noticed her hovering, and she knew she had to either approach or retreat. There was no middle ground in this moment that would define the rest of her life. John must have sensed her presence because he suddenly looked up, his face going through a series of emotions so quickly that Becca almost felt sorry for him. Surprise, guilt, fear, and then that smooth mask he wore during difficult business negotiations. Becca? His voice came out strangled, and he immediately dropped Amber's hand like it had caught fire. What are you doing here? It was such an absurd question that Becca almost laughed. What was she doing at the mall her uncle owned, shopping for their baby while he conducted his affair in public? I could ask you the same thing, she managed to say, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. I thought you had investor meetings today. Amber looked between them with calculating eyes, clearly assessing the situation. She was older than Becca had initially thought, probably in her early 30s, with the kind of polished confidence that came from knowing exactly how beautiful and desirable she was. So this is the wife you mentioned, Amber said, making no attempt to hide her assessment of Becca's pregnant form. Her tone was conversational, but Becca could hear the steel underneath. You didn't mention she was quite so expectant. The emphasis on the last word hit Becca like a physical blow. This woman knew about her pregnancy, knew about their marriage, and was sitting here anyway, wearing Becca's anniversary gift and holding her husband's hand. Amber, please, John said, his voice carrying a warning that suggested this conversation had happened before. This isn't the time or place. When is the time, John? Becca asked, finding her voice growing stronger with each word. When were you planning to tell me about your business associate who wears my jewelry and holds your hand during investor meetings? John's face flushed red as he realized how weak his cover story sounded. Becca, you're jumping to conclusions. Amber is helping me with some marketing strategies for the new development. The necklace was just a thank you gift for her excellent work. A thank you gift? Becca's voice rose slightly, drawing more attention from nearby tables. You told me it was designed specifically for our anniversary. You said it represented the constellation where we had our first kiss. Amber laughed, a sound like silver bells that would have been beautiful if it weren't so cruel. Constellation? Oh, honey, that's rich. He told me it reminded him of my eyes in candlelight. The casual endearment and the revelation that John had spun completely different romantic stories about the same piece of jewelry hit Becca like a 1-2 punch. Her legs suddenly felt weak, and she had to grip the back of an empty chair to steady herself. That's enough, John said sharply, finally showing some protective instinct, though Becca wasn't sure if he was protecting her or himself. Both of you. Don't you dare tell me that's enough, Becca said, her voice shaking with anger now instead of shock. I'm 7 months pregnant with your child, John. 7 months pregnant, and I'm finding out that my husband has been lying to me about everything. You're being dramatic, John said, falling back on his usual tactic of dismissing her emotions as hormonal overreactions. This is exactly why I didn't want to discuss business with you. You turn everything into a personal attack. Business? Amber interjected, her voice dripping with amusement. Is that what we're calling it now? The blonde woman stood up gracefully, moving around the table with predatory elegance. She was taller than Becca, especially in her designer heels, and she used every inch of that advantage as she looked down at the pregnant woman who was clearly ruining her afternoon. Let me make this simple for you, Amber said, her voice losing all pretense of politeness. John and I have been seeing each other for months. We have a connection that goes far beyond business, and frankly, far beyond what he has at home with someone who's let herself go so completely. The words hit Becca like physical blows. each one designed to find her deepest insecurities about her changing body and her failing marriage. She could feel tears threatening, but she refused to give this woman the satisfaction of seeing her cry. "Let myself go," Becca repeated, her hand moving protectively to her belly. "I'm growing his child." "A child he never wanted," Amber said with casual cruelty. "Do you really think a man like John wants to be tied down with midnight feedings and dirty diapers? He's in his prime, building an empire. The last thing he needs is a clingy wife and a screaming baby holding him back." Becca looked at John, waiting for him to contradict Amber's claims, to defend their marriage and their unborn child. But he sat frozen in his chair, his face pale and his eyes focused on the table, as if he could disappear into the marble surface. His silence spoke louder than any words could have. "John?" Becca whispered, needing to hear him deny what Amber had said. "Tell her she's wrong." When he finally looked up, his eyes held a mixture of guilt and resignation that confirmed Becca's worst fears. "Becca, this isn't how I wanted you to find out, but maybe it's better this way. We both know things haven't been good between us for a long time." The shopping bag slipped from Becca's numb fingers, spilling carefully chosen baby clothes across the food court floor. The beautiful blue dress she had been so excited to show Claire scattered among strangers' feet, along with the tiny sleepers and the cashmere soft yellow blanket. As she bent to gather the scattered items, her pregnant belly making the movement awkward and undignified, Amber deliberately stepped closer and gave Becca's shoulder a hard shove. "Oops," Amber said with false sweetness as Becca stumbled sideways, barely catching herself against a nearby table. "These floors can be so slippery." The food court erupted in gasps and concerned voices as shoppers realized they were witnessing something far more serious than a simple argument between strangers. The force of Amber's shove sent Becca stumbling into a nearby table where an elderly couple was sharing coffee and pastries. The woman's cup clattered against its saucer, spilling cappuccino across the white tablecloth, while her husband jumped up with surprising agility for his age. "Young lady, are you all right?" the elderly man asked, his voice full of genuine concern as he steadied Becca with gentle hands. "Should we call someone?" Becca's face burned with humiliation as she realized that at least 24 people had witnessed her public confrontation and the physical assault that followed. Conversations had stopped mid-sentence. Phones were being pulled out to record the drama, and she could hear the buzz of speculation spreading through the food court like wildfire. "I'm fine," she managed to whisper, though she was clearly anything but fine. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely gather the scattered baby clothes, and tears were threatening to spill over despite her efforts to maintain some dignity. Amber stood over her with a satisfied smirk, making no pretense of the shove being accidental. "Clumsy and pregnant," she said loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. "What a combination! No wonder John needs a real woman in his life." "That's enough, Amber," John finally said, but his voice lacked any real authority. He was looking around nervously at the crowd, clearly more concerned about his public image than his wife's well-being. "Is it enough?" Amber shot back, her voice rising to match the drama of the moment. "Because I think everyone here should know exactly what kind of man they're looking at. The kind who promises his pregnant wife one thing while sneaking around with his real girlfriend." The elderly woman who had been helping Becca gather the baby clothes looked up sharply. "Your pregnant wife?" she said to John, her voice filled with disgust. "You did this to your pregnant wife?" More voices joined the chorus of disapproval. Becca could hear fragments of conversation floating around her. Shameful, disgusting, poor woman, and she realized that her private nightmare had become public entertainment. "Please," Becca said quietly to the elderly woman helping her. "I just want to leave." "Of course, honey," the woman said, her maternal instincts kicking in as she efficiently gathered the remaining items. "Do you have someone you can call? You shouldn't drive yourself when you're this upset." Becca nodded, pulling her phone from her purse with trembling fingers. She scrolled to Claire's number, but before she could dial, a new voice cut through the noise of the crowd. "Excuse me, is there a problem here?" Everyone turned to see a young man in a mall security uniform approaching the scene. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and serious brown eyes that took in the situation quickly. His name tag read T. Sullivan, and something about the surname made Becca's heart skip a beat. "No problem, officer," Amber said sweetly. immediately switching to her charming persona. Just a family discussion that got a little heated. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step back, Tommy Sullivan said to Amber, his voice carrying the kind of authority that suggested he was used to handling difficult situations. And sir, you need to control your guest behavior on mall property. John stood up finally, smoothing his suit jacket and trying to reassert his authority. Look, this is a private matter between my wife and myself. We don't need mall security involved. Your wife? Tommy's eyes moved to Becca, who was still crouched on the floor gathering baby clothes with the help of the elderly stranger. Ma'am, are you injured? Do you need medical attention? She's fine, John said quickly. Just a little accident. Nothing to worry about. Tommy ignored John completely and addressed Becca directly. Ma'am, I witnessed what happened. That was not an accident. Would you like me to call the police? Becca looked up at the young security guard, noting again the familiar surname on his name tag. Sullivan was her maiden name, the name she had given up when she married John 8 years ago. In the state she was in, devastated and humiliated, it felt like a sign from the universe. Sullivan? She asked quietly. Tommy nodded, his expression growing more concerned as he noticed her interest in his name. Yes, ma'am, Tommy Sullivan. And you are? Becca Sullivan. I mean, Mitchell, she said, stumbling over her own identity. My maiden name was Sullivan. The change in Tommy's expression was immediate and dramatic. His professional demeanor shifted to something much more personal and protective. Sullivan? Are you related to Daniel Sullivan? He's my uncle, Becca whispered, the words feeling strange on her lips. She hadn't spoken to Uncle Daniel in over 3 years, not since the family drama surrounding her wedding, when he had warned her about John's character, and she had accused him of being jealous of her happiness. Tommy immediately pulled out his radio. This is Tommy Sullivan at the food court. I need Uncle Daniel here immediately. We have a family emergency. Family emergency? John interjected, his voice sharp with irritation. This is ridiculous. Becca, we're leaving. Now. No, Becca said quietly, but with growing strength. I'm not going anywhere with you. The crowd that had gathered to watch the drama was growing larger, and Becca could see people openly recording with their phones now. Whatever privacy she had hoped to maintain was long gone, but something about knowing that Tommy Sullivan was family, even distant family, made her feel less alone in this nightmare. Ma'am, the elderly woman said gently, why don't you come sit down while we wait for your uncle? You shouldn't be standing so long in your condition. Amber, who had been watching the developments with growing irritation, decided to escalate the situation further. This is pathetic, she announced to the crowd. A grown woman calling her uncle because her husband found someone better. Maybe if you hadn't let yourself become such a cow, he wouldn't have needed to look elsewhere. The gasp from the crowd was audible, and several people voiced their disapproval of Amber's cruel words. But the damage was done. Becca felt the last of her composure cracking as the reality of her situation hit her fully. She was 7 months pregnant, publicly humiliated, and discovering that her marriage was over in the most brutal way possible. The man she had trusted with her heart and her future had been living a double life, and his mistress had no qualms about destroying what remained of Becca's dignity. But as she stood there surrounded by strangers' sympathy and her husband's betrayal, she also realized that she wasn't as powerless as she felt. The Sullivan name carried weight in this community, and Uncle Daniel owned this mall where John had chosen to conduct his affair. For the first time since she had spotted John across the food court, Becca felt a spark of something that wasn't despair. It wasn't quite hope yet, but it was the beginning of anger, and anger was stronger than heartbreak. Tommy's radio crackled to life. This is Daniel Sullivan. What's the situation with my niece? The question hung in the air as everyone within earshot realized that this wasn't just a domestic dispute anymore. This was about to become a family matter. And in this town, that meant the Sullivan family, one of the most powerful business families in the state. John's face went pale as he began to understand the implications of what was happening. Daniel Sullivan arrived at the food court within minutes, moving through the mall with the kind of authority that came from owning every square foot of marble under his feet. At 52, he had the silver-haired distinction of a successful businessman, but his eyes held the fierce protectiveness of a man who had built his empire with his own hands and would destroy anyone who threatened his family. He took in the scene quickly. The scattered baby clothes, the crowd of onlookers, Tommy standing protectively near a pregnant woman who looked devastated, and two well-dressed individuals who radiated guilt and defiance in equal measure. Rebecca, Daniel's voice was softer than Becca had ever heard it, carrying 3 years of regret and concern. Sweetheart, what happened here? The sound of her full name spoken with such tenderness broke something loose in Becca's chest. She hadn't been called sweetheart since her grandmother's funeral, hadn't felt truly protected since she was a child visiting the Sullivan family estate during summers. Uncle Danny, she whispered, the childhood nickname slipping out before she could stop it. I didn't know Tommy was your nephew, too. I haven't seen him since he was just a kid. Third shift security supervisor now, Daniel said with obvious pride, though his eyes never left Becca's face. He called in a family emergency. Tell me what happened. Tommy stepped forward, his professional demeanor returning as he addressed his uncle. Sir, I witnessed the blonde woman deliberately push Mrs. Mitchell. She's 7 months pregnant. Before that, there was a verbal altercation involving infidelity accusations. Daniel's expression darkened as he processed this information. His gaze moved to John, and when their eyes met, the temperature in the immediate area seemed to drop several degrees. Jonathan Mitchell, Daniel said, his voice carrying decades of barely concealed contempt. I should have known you'd eventually show your true colors. John straightened his shoulders, trying to project the confidence that usually served him well in business negotiations. Daniel, this is a private matter between my wife and myself. I don't appreciate mall security getting involved in personal issues. Your wife? Daniel's laugh was harsh and without humor. The wife you just humiliated in public while she's carrying your child? The wife whose maiden name is Sullivan, which makes her my family and therefore my business? The crowd was listening to every word, and Becca could see people beginning to recognize Daniel Sullivan. His face was often in the local business pages, and the Sullivan name was synonymous with commercial real estate success throughout the region. Uncle Danny, Becca said quietly, drawing his attention back to her. I'm sorry I haven't called. After the wedding, when we argued about John, I thought you were just being overprotective. Daniel's expression softened immediately. Sweetheart, you have nothing to apologize for. I should have tried harder to reach out, should have swallowed my pride and been there for you. He looked around at the crowd and then back at her. But right now, let's get you somewhere private so we can talk properly. She's not going anywhere with you, Amber interjected, apparently unaware of just how powerful the man she was challenging actually was. John and I have plans this afternoon. And you are? Daniel asked, his voice deceptively mild. Amber Westfield, she replied, lifting her chin with confidence. John's business partner. Business partner? Daniel's eyebrows rose slightly. How interesting. Tommy, pull up the security footage from the past 2 hours. I want to see exactly what kind of business meeting this was. Tommy immediately pulled out his radio to coordinate with the security office, while John's face went from pale to ashen. That's not necessary, he said quickly. Like I said, this is a private matter. Nothing that happens on my property is private from me, Daniel replied calmly, especially when it involves assault on a pregnant family member. Becca watched this exchange with growing amazement. She had forgotten how commanding Uncle Daniel could be, how his quiet authority could make grown men nervous. During her childhood visits, she had seen him negotiate multi-million-dollar deals with the same calm demeanor he was displaying now. Mr. Sullivan, the elderly woman who had been helping Becca, spoke up hesitantly. I saw everything that happened. That young woman definitely pushed your niece deliberately. It was unprovoked and cruel. Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. My husband and I shop here every Saturday. We've never seen anything like this before. Daniel nodded appreciatively. Mrs. Henderson, would you be willing to give a statement to mall security about what you witnessed? Of course. No one should treat a pregnant woman that way, especially not in public. Amber was beginning to look less confident as she realized that the situation was spiraling beyond her control. This is insane, she said, her voice rising slightly. I barely touched her. She's obviously just trying to cause drama because she can't handle the fact that her husband doesn't want her anymore. The words hung in the air like poison, and Becca felt their impact like physical blows. But before she could respond, Daniel stepped forward, his presence suddenly seeming much larger and more intimidating. "Miss Westfield," he said, his voice cutting through the crowd noise like a blade, "you've just admitted to deliberately touching my pregnant niece during an altercation. That constitutes assault. You've also just publicly slandered a member of my family. I suggest you consider your next words very carefully." "You can't threaten me," Amber said, but her voice lacked its earlier confidence. "I know my rights." "And I know mine," Daniel replied smoothly. "As the owner of this property, I have the right to ban anyone who commits assault on the premises. As a private citizen, I have the right to pursue legal action against anyone who assaults my family members. And as someone with considerable influence in this community, I have the ability to make life very difficult for people who make poor choices." John finally found his voice again. "Daniel, there's no need for threats. This situation got out of hand, but it's over now." "Is it?" Daniel turned his attention back to John. "Because from where I'm standing, you brought your mistress to my mall, conducted your affair on my property, and allowed her to assault my pregnant niece while you sat there and did nothing. I'd say this situation is just beginning." Tommy approached with a tablet displaying security footage. "Uncle Daniel, I've got the feed queued up. You'll want to see this." As Daniel took the tablet, Becca felt a strange sense of detachment, as if she were watching someone else's life implode in real time. The woman in the security footage looked like her, but she felt disconnected from the person who had walked into this mall that morning, believing she had a solid marriage and a secure future. "Interesting," Daniel said after watching the footage for several minutes. "This shows John and Miss Westfield arriving together, holding hands, engaging in intimate conversation over lunch, and then Miss Westfield deliberately pushing my niece after a confrontation about infidelity." He looked up at John with an expression that would have been appropriate for examining something unpleasant on the bottom of his shoe. "Tell me, John, how long has this been going on?" "That's none of your business," John replied, but his defiance sounded hollow. "When you conduct your affairs on my property and assault my family, it becomes my business," Daniel said quietly. "And when you break the heart of someone I love, it becomes personal." Becca felt tears threatening again, but this time they weren't entirely from sadness. The feeling of being protected, of having someone powerful in her corner, was almost overwhelming after months of feeling isolated and unimportant in her own marriage. "Uncle Danny," she said softly, "I just want to go home." "Of course, sweetheart," Daniel replied immediately. "Tommy will escort you to your car, and I'll follow you home to make sure you're all right." "She's not going anywhere without me," John said, taking a step toward Becca. "She's my wife." Daniel moved smoothly to block John's path, and for the first time, Becca saw the steel beneath her uncle's polished exterior. "Actually, she's going wherever she wants to go. And if you take one more step toward her while she's clearly distressed, you'll be dealing with more than just mall security." The threat was delivered so quietly that Becca almost didn't hear it, but John clearly understood. He stopped moving and took a step back. "This isn't over," John said, his voice carrying a warning of his own. "No," Daniel agreed, his smile sharp enough to cut glass. "It's definitely not over." Daniel's private office occupied the entire top floor of the mall's administrative wing, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of the shopping center below. Becca had never seen the executive level of the mall before, and she was surprised by its understated elegance. Mahogany furniture, Persian rugs, and oil paintings that looked like they belonged in a museum. "Sit down, sweetheart," Daniel said gently, guiding her to a leather chair that probably cost more than her monthly salary. "Can I get you anything? Water? Tea? I think I have some of those crackers pregnant women are supposed to eat." Despite everything that had happened, Becca found herself smiling slightly at his obvious effort to take care of her. "Water would be good. Thank you." Tommy had accompanied them upstairs and was now standing before a wall of monitors that displayed every corner of the shopping center in real time. The technology was far more sophisticated than Becca had imagined, with cameras that could zoom in close enough to read text messages and audio pickup that could capture conversations from surprising distances. "This is incredible," Becca said, looking around the room. "I had no idea the mall had this level of security." "Most people don't," Daniel replied, handing her a bottle of imported spring water. But when you own property worth this much, you need to know everything that happens on it. He moved to stand beside Tommy at the monitor wall. Show me everything from the past 3 months. I want to know how long John has been using my property for his affair. Tommy's fingers flew over the keyboard, pulling up archived footage with the efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. The screens flickered through images of different areas of the mall at various times and dates. Here's the first instance I can find, Tommy said, pointing to a screen showing John and Amber entering the mall together on a Tuesday afternoon in September. They came in through the north entrance, went straight to the jewelry store, then had lunch at the Italian place. Becca's stomach clenched as she watched her husband buying jewelry with another woman 3 months ago. The necklace she had treasured as an anniversary gift had been selected by his mistress, chosen while Becca was at work teaching 5-year-olds their letters and numbers. Keep going, Daniel said grimly. The footage revealed a pattern of deception that was staggering in its scope. John and Amber had been meeting at the mall regularly for months, sometimes twice a week. They browsed stores together, shared intimate meals, and behaved like a couple in every way. In several instances, Amber was wearing clothes and jewelry that Becca recognized as gifts John had claimed to have bought online. He's been lying about everything, Becca whispered, watching footage of John and Amber shopping for what appeared to be weekend getaway clothes. Every business trip, every late meeting, every excuse he made for not coming to my doctor's appointments. Tommy, run a background check on Amber Westfield, Daniel said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to having information at his fingertips. I want to know everything about her. Already on it, Tommy replied, pulling up a different screen that displayed social media profiles, public records, and news articles. This is interesting. She's been featured in 3 different society magazines over the past 2 years, always with different wealthy men. Never the same guy twice. The screen filled with photos of Amber at charity galas, restaurant openings, and exclusive events, always on the arm of a different successful businessman. In several photos, she was wearing expensive jewelry that clearly had been gifts from her various companions. She's a professional, Daniel said with disgust. She targets married men with money and breaks up families for profit. Becca studied the photos, noting how Amber's appearance had been carefully crafted to appeal to successful men. Everything from her hair color to her wardrobe was designed to project sophistication and availability. She was beautiful, but it was a calculated beauty that served a specific purpose. Look at this, Tommy said, pulling up a series of social media posts. She's currently pursuing at least 3 other married executives. She has a system. She researches their interests, their business associates, even their wives' schedules. The evidence was overwhelming. Amber Westfield was not some unfortunate woman who had fallen in love with a married man. She was a predator who had specifically targeted John because of his wealth and apparent vulnerability in his marriage. How did she know about John? Becca asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. His business partner, Marcus Thompson, introduced them, Tommy said, pulling up more footage. Look at this from 6 months ago. The screen showed John, Marcus, and Amber at a restaurant Becca recognized as one of the most expensive in the city. The men were clearly conducting business, while Amber listened attentively, occasionally asking questions and taking notes on her phone. She seduced him right in front of his business partner, Becca said, feeling a mixture of revulsion and pity for how easily John had been manipulated. Marcus just sat there and watched it happen. Marcus has his own problems, Daniel said darkly. My investigators have been tracking some irregularities in Mitchell Development's finances. Money that should be going to contractors and suppliers is being diverted to offshore accounts. Becca felt another piece of her world crumble. You've been investigating John's business? Daniel's expression grew uncomfortable. I've been worried about you, Rebecca. After our argument at your wedding, I couldn't just cut you out of my life completely. I had my people keep an eye on things, make sure you were safe. You've been spying on me? I've been protecting you, Daniel corrected gently. And it's a good thing I did, because your husband's business is built on a foundation that's about to collapse. Without the Sullivan family's indirect support through our business relationships, Mitchell Development would have failed years ago. The implications of this revelation were staggering. Becca had believed that John's success was entirely his own achievement, that she had married a self-made millionaire who had built his empire through intelligence and hard work. Learning that his success depended on her family's influence made everything feel like an elaborate lie. "How much of his business depends on Sullivan connections?" she asked. "About 60%, Daniel replied bluntly. "The Mitchell development brand is successful because I've steered contracts his way, recommended him to other developers, and vouched for his reliability. Without that support, he's just another small-time real estate developer with more debt than assets." Tommy looked up from his computer screen. "Uncle Daniel, you need to see this. I've been tracking Amber's financial records, and she's received significant payments from John over the past 4 months. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars." "He's been paying her?" Becca asked, incredulous. "More than paying her," Tommy replied. "He's been bankrolling her lifestyle. Designer clothes, expensive apartment, luxury car lease, all coming from Mitchell development accounts." Daniel's expression grew thunderous. "He's been embezzling from his own company to support his mistress while his pregnant wife shops for baby clothes, with money she thinks came from legitimate business success." The room fell silent as the full scope of John's betrayal became clear. He hadn't just been unfaithful. He had been systematically stealing from his business to fund his affair while lying to Becca about everything from his work schedule to his financial situation. "I need to call my lawyer," Becca said quietly. "I need to protect myself and the baby." "Already done," Daniel replied. "Margaret Henley is the best family law attorney in the state. She'll be here within the hour." "Doree, grandmother's lawyer?" "Your grandmother specifically requested that Margaret handle any legal issues involving family members. She's been preparing for this conversation since the day you married John." Becca felt overwhelmed by the revelation that her family had been watching and waiting, ready to protect her from a disaster they had seen coming years before she did. Grandmother knew this would happen? "Maggie Sullivan doesn't reach her age and success by being naive about human nature," Daniel said with a slight smile. "She's been hoping she was wrong about John, but she wasn't about to leave you unprotected if she was right." The sound of the office door opening interrupted their conversation. A distinguished woman in her 50s entered, carrying a leather briefcase and moving with the confidence of someone who had won more legal battles than she had lost. "Rebecca," Margaret Henley said warmly, "I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances, but I'm here to make sure you and your baby are protected." As Becca shook hands with the lawyer, she realized that her nightmare morning was transforming into something else entirely. For the first time in years, she felt like she had people on her side who were more powerful than the forces arrayed against her. John might have thought he held all the cards in their marriage, but he had forgotten that Becca Sullivan came from a family that knew how to fight and how to win. The Sullivan family estate sat on 50 acres of rolling hills outside the city, its Georgian architecture commanding respect from behind wrought iron gates that had protected the property for 3 generations. As Daniel's car wound up the circular driveway, Becca felt the familiar mixture of awe and belonging that had defined her childhood visits to this place. Grandmother Maggie was waiting on the front steps, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the emergency nature of their visit. At 75, she moved with the grace of someone who had never doubted her place in the world. But Becca could see the concern in her sharp blue eyes as the car approached. "My dear girl," Maggie said, as Becca carefully climbed out of the passenger seat, her pregnant belly making the movement awkward. "Come here to me." The embrace that followed was everything Becca hadn't realized she needed. Fierce, protective, and infused with the kind of unconditional love that had been missing from her life for too long. Maggie's arms were surprisingly strong for her age, and she held Becca as if she could shield her from all the pain in the world through sheer force of will. "I should have called you," Becca whispered into her grandmother's shoulder. "I should have listened when you and Uncle Danny tried to warn me about John." "Nonsense," Maggie said firmly, pulling back to look at Becca's face. "You followed your heart, as young people should. The fault lies with that man who betrayed your trust, not with you for believing in love." They moved inside to the sun-filled conservatory where Maggie had taken her tea for as long as Becca could remember. The room was filled with orchids and jasmine, creating an atmosphere of serenity that felt like a different world from the chaos of the morning. "Daniel told me what happened," Maggie said as she poured tea from a delicate china service that had been in the family for generations. That dreadful woman pushing you while you're carrying my great-grandchild. The absolute nerve. It was humiliating, Becca admitted, accepting a cup of her grandmother's special blend. All those people watching, recording it on their phones. By now, it's probably all over social media. Let them watch, Maggie said with steel in her voice. Let them see exactly what kind of man Jonathan Mitchell really is. Sometimes public shame is the only consequence that matters to people like him. Becca sipped her tea, feeling some of the tension leave her shoulders for the first time in hours. The conservatory had always been her sanctuary during difficult times, and being here with Maggie made her feel like the protected little girl she had once been. "Grandmother, I don't know what to do," she said honestly. "I thought I had a good marriage, a secure future for my baby. Now I find out that everything I believed was a lie." Maggie set down her teacup with the deliberate precision that Becca remembered from childhood, the gesture that meant her grandmother was about to share something important. "Rebecca, I need to tell you some things about your husband's business that you may not want to hear," Maggie said gently. "But as a woman about to become a mother, you deserve to know the truth about your financial situation." Intertwiniamon. Daniel mentioned that Sullivan Properties has been supporting John's business indirectly. "More than supporting it," Maggie corrected. "We've been propping it up. 3 years ago, when you were newlyweds, John came to me asking for investment in a development project. I declined, but I agreed to help him establish credit relationships and contractor connections as a wedding gift to you." Becca felt her stomach sink. "You've been helping him because of me?" "Initially, yes. But as time went on, it became clear that Jonathan's business practices were questionable at best. He overextends himself financially, makes promises to investors that he can't keep, and cuts corners on construction quality to maximize profits." "Are you saying his business isn't successful?" Maggie pulled a folder from the side table next to her chair. "I'm saying his business exists entirely because of Sullivan family influence. Without our recommendation, he never would have gotten the bank loans. Without our contractor relationships, his projects would have failed. Without our social connections, he never would have attracted investors." The folder contained financial documents that painted a devastating picture of Mitchell Development's true state. John's company was carrying massive debt, had defaulted on several contractor payments, and was facing potential lawsuits from investors who had discovered irregularities in project costs. "He's been living on borrowed time and borrowed money," Maggie continued. "The only thing keeping him afloat has been the reputation he gained through family connections. But that protection ends today." "What do you mean?" "I mean that as of this afternoon, Sullivan Properties is severing all business relationships with Mitchell Development. Our contractors have been instructed to demand immediate payment for outstanding invoices. Our banking connections have been notified that we no longer recommend Jonathan for credit extensions." "Ooh." Becca stared at her grandmother in shock. "You're destroying his business?" "I'm withdrawing our unearned support," Maggie corrected. "His business will survive or fail based on its own merits, which unfortunately appear to be non-existent." The implications were staggering. John's world was about to collapse, not because of some elaborate revenge plot, but simply because the Sullivan family would no longer shield him from the consequences of his own poor decisions. "But what about the baby?" Becca asked, her hand moving protectively to her belly. "What about child support if he loses everything?" Maggie's expression softened. "Sweetheart, your baby will want for nothing. You're a Sullivan, and this family takes care of its own. That child will grow up with every advantage we can provide, and she'll learn to be strong and independent like her mother." "She?" "Intuition," Maggie said with a slight smile. "Sullivan women have a talent for producing strong daughters. Speaking of which, I have something for you." Maggie walked to an antique secretary desk and retrieved a velvet jewelry box that Becca recognized from childhood. Inside was the Sullivan family's emerald necklace, a piece that had been passed down through 5 generations of Sullivan women. "This belongs to you now," Maggie said, fastening the necklace around Becca's throat. "Not because you're married to a man who bought jewelry for his mistress, but because you're a Sullivan woman about to raise the next generation of this family." The weight of the emeralds against her skin felt like a promise and a responsibility. Becca had always assumed the necklace would eventually come to her, but she had expected to receive it under happier circumstances. There's something else, Maggie said, returning to her chair. Something about Jonathan's business partner that you need to know. She pulled out another document, this one bearing the letterhead of a private investigation firm. Marcus Thompson has been embezzling from Mitchell Development for over a year. He's stolen nearly $500,000 and funneled it through offshore accounts. Does John know? We don't think so. Marcus has been very careful to cover his tracks, and Jonathan has been too distracted by his affair to pay attention to the financial details. Becca felt a strange sense of justice in this revelation. John had been betrayed by his business partner just as thoroughly as he had betrayed his wife. What happens when John finds out? That depends on when he finds out, Maggie said with a slight smile that reminded Becca that her grandmother had not built a business empire by being naive about human nature. The timing of such revelations can be very important. Understanding dawned on Becca slowly. You're going to tell him about Marcus's embezzlement right when his business is collapsing from losing Sullivan support. I'm going to provide evidence of criminal activity to the appropriate authorities at the most effective moment, Maggie corrected delicately. When that happens to coincide with other business difficulties is merely unfortunate timing. Despite everything that had happened, Becca found herself smiling for the first time all day. Her grandmother's approach to justice was elegant in its completeness. John would lose his business, his reputation, his financial security, and discover that his trusted partner had been robbing him blind, all in the same week that his pregnant wife left him for conducting a public affair. Now, Maggie said, settling back in her chair with satisfaction, let's discuss the practical arrangements for your new life. You and the baby will live here until you decide what you want to do long term. The carriage house has been renovated into a beautiful apartment, and you'll have all the privacy you need while staying close to family. I can't just move in here, grandmother. I have a house, a job, a life. You have a house that's mortgaged to a man who's about to lose everything. You have a job that you love, but that doesn't pay enough to support a child on its own. And you have a life that you've just discovered was built on lies. The truth of these statements was undeniable, but accepting help felt like admitting defeat. I want to be independent. I want to take care of myself and my baby. Independence isn't about refusing help, dear, Maggie said gently. It's about having the strength to accept support when you need it and the wisdom to build something better for the future. You're not running away from your problems. You're positioning yourself to solve them from a place of strength. As if to punctuate her grandmother's words, Becca's phone began ringing. John's name appeared on the screen, and she could see 17 missed calls and twice as many text messages. Don't answer that, Maggie said firmly. Let Margaret handle all communication with Jonathan from now on. Your job is to focus on your health and your baby's well-being. Becca declined the call and turned off her phone. For the first time in years, she felt like she wasn't facing her problems alone. The Sullivan family might have their complicated dynamics and their share of secrets, but when one of their own was threatened, they closed ranks with formidable efficiency. Thank you, she said quietly, for everything. For warning me about John, for watching out for me even when I was too proud to listen, for being here when I need you most. Family is family, Maggie replied simply. And you, my dear girl, are about to learn just how powerful this family can be when we work together. Margaret Henley spread legal documents across the mahogany conference table in the Sullivan Estate's formal dining room, while Becca, Daniel, and Maggie listened to her outline the steps that would protect both Becca and her unborn child from the chaos about to engulf John's life. First things first, Margaret said, adjusting her reading glasses. We need to establish legal separation immediately. This protects Becca from any financial liability when John's business collapses, and it gives us grounds to seek emergency spousal support. How long will that take? Becca asked, still feeling overwhelmed by the speed at which her life was changing. I can file the paperwork tomorrow morning. Given the circumstances, your pregnancy, the evidence of infidelity, and the assault by his mistress, the court will expedite the process. Daniel leaned forward in his chair. What about the house? Becca shouldn't have to worry about losing her home while she's dealing with everything else. The house is mortgaged under John's business credit, Margaret explained. When Mitchell Development fails, the bank will probably foreclose. But we can argue that Becca needs temporary housing during her pregnancy, which might buy us some time. She doesn't need temporary housing, Maggie interjected firmly. She has permanent housing here with family. Let Jonathan worry about his mortgage payments. Margaret nodded approvingly. That's actually better for our case. It shows that Becca has family support and isn't making demands on John's assets out of vindictiveness. Claire Richardson arrived as they were discussing custody arrangements, having driven straight from her shift at the hospital when she received Becca's text explaining the situation. She hugged her best friend carefully, mindful of the pregnancy, before taking a seat at the table. I can't believe John would do this to you, Claire said, shaking her head. And that woman actually pushed you? While you're pregnant? The assault is actually helpful for our case, Margaret said with professional detachment. It demonstrates that John's relationship choices create a dangerous environment for Becca and the baby. Speaking of dangerous environments, Daniel said, I've been monitoring John's communications since this afternoon. He's called Becca 43 times, sent 67 text messages, and driven past this house twice in the last hour. Becca felt a chill run down her spine. He's been driving past here? Our security system tracks all vehicles approaching the property, Daniel explained. He's not trying to enter, just checking to see if you're here. That's stalking behavior, Margaret said, making notes on her legal pad. We'll add that to our petition for a protective order. Tommy appeared in the doorway of the dining room, his expression serious. Uncle Daniel, John Mitchell is at the front gate demanding to see his wife. He's becoming increasingly agitated. Through the dining room windows, they could see John's BMW parked outside the estate's entrance, with John himself pacing back and forth while speaking animatedly into his phone. Don't open the gate, Daniel instructed, and call the police if he doesn't leave within the next 10 minutes. Already done, Tommy replied. Officer Martinez is en route. Margaret looked up from her documents. Perfect. We need documentation of his harassment for the protective order. Becca watched her husband through the window, noting how his usually perfect appearance had deteriorated throughout the day. His suit was wrinkled, his hair disheveled, and his movements had the manic energy of someone whose carefully constructed world was disintegrating. He's scared, she said quietly. I've never seen him like this. He should be scared, Maggie replied without sympathy. His business is failing, his investors are asking questions, and his pregnant wife has discovered his affair. Any reasonable person would be terrified. Claire squeezed Becca's hand. You don't have to feel sorry for him. He created this situation with his own choices. I know, Becca said. It's just strange seeing him so desperate. He's always been so controlled, so confident. That confidence was built on deception, Daniel said, watching as a police cruiser pulled up behind John's car. Without his lies to sustain him, he's just another failed businessman who destroyed his family for a woman who never loved him. Through the window, they watched Officer Martinez approach John's car and engage him in conversation. The discussion appeared heated, with John gesturing toward the house and the officer responding with firm hand gestures that clearly indicated he needed to leave. What's the timeline for everything else? Becca asked Margaret, trying to focus on practical matters rather than the drama unfolding outside. I'll file for legal separation tomorrow morning, along with requests for spousal support and a protective order. The protective order should be approved within 48 hours, especially with the assault evidence and the stalking behavior we're documenting now. And the business investigation? Daniel answered this question. My people will turn over evidence of Marcus Thompson's embezzlement to the FBI on Wednesday. That gives John 1 day to discover the missing money on his own, which he probably won't since he's too busy trying to save his failing projects. Meanwhile, Maggie added, every Sullivan Properties contractor will demand immediate payment for outstanding invoices on Monday morning. John will spend the first half of the week scrambling to find money that doesn't exist. The systematic destruction of John's life was being planned with the same efficiency that the Sullivan family brought to their business operations. Becca felt simultaneously impressed and disturbed by their ability to dismantle someone's entire existence within a matter of days. Is this legal? She asked Margaret. Absolutely, the lawyer replied. Withdrawing business support isn't illegal. It's just business. Reporting embezzlement to authorities is a civic duty. Filing for separation when your husband commits adultery is completely justified. The timing seems coordinated. Margaret smiled slightly. Good legal strategy often involves coordinating legitimate actions for maximum effect. Nothing we're doing is unethical or illegal. We're just doing it all at once. Officer Martinez appeared at the front door, escorted by Tommy. The policeman was middle-aged and professional, with the patient demeanor of someone who had dealt with domestic disputes many times before. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said to Becca, "I spoke with your husband at the gate. He claims you're being held here against your will and that your family is preventing him from seeing you." "That's not true," Becca said firmly. "I came here voluntarily after discovering his affair. I don't want to see him right now." "He also claims that you stole his credit cards and emptied his bank accounts." Becca looked confused. "I haven't touched his accounts. I bought some baby clothes this morning with the card he gave me for shopping, but that's all." Daniel and Maggie exchanged a look that suggested they knew more about John's financial problems than they had revealed. "Officer Martinez," Margaret interjected, "my client is 7 months pregnant and has just discovered her husband's infidelity. She's staying with family for emotional support and has every right to do so. If Mr. Mitchell continues to harass her, we'll be seeking a protective order." "I explained that to him," Officer Martinez replied. "He's agreed to leave the property, but he wanted me to verify that Mrs. Mitchell is here voluntarily." "Completely voluntarily," Becca confirmed. "An officer, there was an incident at Westfield Mall today where my husband's mistress physically assaulted me. I'm pregnant, and she pushed me deliberately." Officer Martinez made notes in his report book. "Do you want to file charges?" Becca looked at Margaret, who nodded encouragingly. "Yes, I do. I'll need you to come to the station tomorrow to give a formal statement. We'll also need the security footage from the mall." "Already prepared," Daniel said, handing the officer a flash drive. "This contains all relevant footage from this afternoon's incident." After Officer Martinez left, the group returned to their planning session. Becca felt emotionally drained, but also oddly energized by the sense that she was finally taking control of her situation. "What about Amber?" she asked. "What happens to her when John loses everything?" "Women like Amber Westfield always have backup plans," Maggie said with distaste. "She'll move on to her next target and pretend she never knew Jonathan Mitchell." "Actually," Tommy said, looking up from his phone, "she might not have that option. I've been monitoring her social media, and she's been posting photos of expensive gifts that John bought her. If those purchases were made with embezzled funds, she could be charged as an accessory." The room fell silent as everyone processed this information. "You're saying she could go to prison?" Becca asked. "If the FBI can prove she knew the money was stolen, yes," Margaret replied. "And given that she's been targeting married men systematically, they might investigate her other relationships as well." Becca felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and pity. Amber had destroyed her marriage and humiliated her in public, but the idea of anyone going to prison felt sobering. "She made her choices," Claire said, reading Becca's expression, "just like John made his. You can't protect people from the consequences of their own actions." As the sun set over the Sullivan estate, Becca realized that her old life was truly over. Tomorrow would bring legal documents, police statements, and the beginning of a very public dissolution of everything she had built with John. But for the first time in months, she felt like she had a future worth fighting for. Monday morning arrived with unseasonable warmth for late October, but the peaceful weather did nothing to calm the storm that was about to break over John Mitchell's life. From the carriage house where she had spent her first night on the Sullivan estate, Becca could see the main house's activity through her kitchen window as the family coordinated their efforts with military precision. Her phone had been buzzing constantly since 6 a.m., but she followed Margaret's advice and ignored every call from John. Instead, she focused on the simple ritual of making breakfast and taking her prenatal vitamins, trying to maintain some normalcy for her baby's sake. At exactly 9 o'clock, Margaret called with the first update. "Legal separation paperwork has been filed," the lawyer reported. "The court clerk said we should have a response by Wednesday. The protective order hearing is scheduled for Thursday morning." "How's John taking it?" "According to the process server, he became extremely agitated when he received the papers at his office. He immediately called my office 17 times, but I'm not taking his calls. All communication goes through me now." Becca felt a strange sense of relief knowing that John could no longer demand her attention whenever he felt like it. After 8 years of being available for his every mood and crisis, the silence felt like freedom. 20 minutes later, Daniel called from his office at Sullivan Properties. "The first wave has hit," he reported with satisfaction. "Every contractor we've worked with over the years has presented Mitchell Development with invoices for immediate payment. John's secretary called me personally, begging for an extension. How much money does he owe? Close to $2 million. Money he doesn't have because he's been spending it on Amber Westfield instead of paying his bills. Becca shook her head in amazement. $2 million that could have secured their child's future, spent on jewelry and clothes for a woman who was using him for financial gain. There's more, Daniel continued. 3 of his biggest investors called emergency meetings for this afternoon. Word is spreading that Mitchell Development is in financial trouble. By noon, Tommy was providing security updates that painted a picture of John's increasing desperation. He's been calling the estate gate every hour, Tommy reported. When I told him you weren't taking calls, he started threatening to sue the family for alienation of affection. Can he do that? Becca asked, though she suspected the answer. Not successfully, Margaret's voice came through the speakerphone. Alienation of affection requires proof that a third party deliberately destroyed a marriage. Since John destroyed his own marriage by committing adultery, he has no legal standing. At 2 o'clock, Claire arrived for what had become their daily check-in, bringing lunch from Becca's favorite restaurant and the latest gossip from the medical community. Dr. Patterson mentioned that someone called the hospital asking about your employment status, Claire said as they ate sandwiches on the carriage house's sun-drenched porch. Probably John trying to figure out if you're planning to keep working. Are you? Becca considered the question. Her kindergarten teaching position provided stability and purpose. But the Sullivan family's resources meant she didn't need to work for financial reasons anymore. I think so, eventually. But maybe not full-time after the baby comes. You could always substitute teach. That would give you flexibility to stay home when you want to and work when you feel ready. It was a reasonable plan, but Becca found it difficult to make long-term decisions when her immediate future felt so uncertain. Everything depended on how quickly John's life unraveled and whether he would accept reality gracefully or fight the inevitable. She got her answer at 4:30 when Margaret called with urgent news. John just stormed into my office demanding to see you, the lawyer reported. He's claiming that the Sullivan family is manipulating you and that you need protection from your own relatives. What did you tell him? That he had 30 seconds to leave my office before I called security. But Rebecca, he's not behaving rationally. He seemed genuinely convinced that your family has somehow brainwashed you into leaving him. Becca felt a chill of real fear. John's inability to accept responsibility for his actions was troubling enough, but his willingness to blame everyone except himself suggested that he might become dangerous as his situation deteriorated further. Should I be worried? I think you should stay on the estate until the protective order is approved, Margaret advised. And I'm going to recommend that the court include provisions preventing him from contacting your workplace or family members. An hour later, Daniel arrived at the carriage house with news that John's day was about to get much worse. The FBI just raided Mitchell Development's offices, he announced. Marcus Thompson's embezzlement has been discovered, and they're treating it as a federal crime because the stolen money crossed state lines. How did John react? According to my sources, he fainted when the agents told him how much money was missing. Apparently, he had no idea that his business partner had been robbing him blind for over a year. Becca felt an unexpected pang of sympathy for her husband. Whatever his faults, discovering that his trusted partner had stolen $500,000 would be devastating under any circumstances. Learning about it on the same day that his marriage collapsed and his business failed seemed almost cruel. Is there any chance he can recover from this? Daniel shook his head grimly. The FBI has frozen all of Mitchell Development's accounts pending their investigation. Even if John is cleared of wrongdoing, which he probably will be, the company is finished. As if summoned by their conversation, Becca's phone rang with John's number. Against her better judgment, she answered. Becca, thank God. John's voice was hoarse with exhaustion and desperation. You have to come home. Everything is falling apart. Marcus stole our money, the FBI has closed the office, and I need you. John, you can't call me directly. All communication has to go through Margaret. Forget the lawyers, this is our life, our marriage. We can work through this together. There is no together, John. You've been having an affair for months. You brought her to my family's mall and let her assault me while I'm pregnant with your child. Amber doesn't matter. John's voice cracked with emotion. She was just a distraction, a mistake. You're my wife, the mother of my child. I love you. For a moment, Becca almost believed him. This was the John she had fallen in love with 8 years ago. Vulnerable, emotional, and completely focused on her. But then she remembered the security footage of him feeding Amber breadsticks, the necklace he had claimed was one of a kind, and the months of lies about business meetings and investor dinners. If I mattered to you, you wouldn't have spent our child's college fund on another woman, she said quietly. If our marriage mattered to you, you wouldn't have conducted your affair in public where everyone could see. I'll do anything to fix this, John pleaded. I'll end things with Amber permanently. I'll go to counseling. I'll sell everything I own to pay back the money Marcus stole. John, you don't own anything. Your business is bankrupt. Your house is mortgaged beyond its value, and your reputation is destroyed. You have nothing left to sell. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly a minute before John spoke again, his voice flat with defeat. So that's it? 8 years of marriage, and you're just going to throw it all away? I'm not throwing anything away, Becca replied. You threw it away when you chose Amber over our family. I'm just accepting reality. After she hung up, Becca sat on her porch watching the sun set over the estate's gardens. Tomorrow would bring the protective order hearing, followed by negotiations about child support and custody arrangements for a man who might soon be facing his own legal troubles. But tonight, for the first time in months, she felt peaceful. The baby was healthy. She was surrounded by family who loved her, and she had a future that didn't depend on John's lies or Amber's cruelty. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. This isn't over. You'll regret turning your family against me. Becca deleted the message without responding and made a mental note to show it to Margaret in the morning. John might not be ready to accept that his old life was over, but Becca was more than ready to begin her new one. 3 weeks after the mall confrontation that changed everything, Becca woke in her carriage house bedroom to the sound of her daughter practicing martial arts against her ribs. At 31 weeks pregnant, she was finally beginning to look forward to meeting the little person who had been keeping her awake with her acrobatic displays. The protective order had been approved without opposition when John failed to appear at the hearing. Margaret later learned that he had been arrested the previous evening for attempting to withdraw funds from frozen FBI accounts, behavior that suggested his grip on reality was becoming increasingly tenuous. From her kitchen window, Becca could see Tommy directing the installation of additional security cameras around the estate's perimeter. The precautions were probably unnecessary. John was currently being held for psychiatric evaluation after his arrest, but the Sullivan family believed in being thorough when it came to protecting their own. Dr. Patricia Hayes had moved Becca's prenatal appointments to twice weekly, more from concern about stress than any actual complications. The baby's heartbeat remained strong and steady, and her growth was perfectly on track despite the emotional upheaval of the past month. She's going to be a fighter like her mother, Dr. Hayes said during Tuesday morning's appointment, watching the active baby on the ultrasound screen. Have you given any more thought to names? Margaret Rose, Becca replied without hesitation, after my grandmother and my great-grandmother. Strong Sullivan women who knew how to survive anything life threw at them. Perfect choice. And have you decided about the birth plan? Given everything that's happened, you might want to consider having extra support in the delivery room. Becca smiled, thinking about the list of family members who had already volunteered to be present for Margaret Rose's arrival. I think support won't be a problem. After her appointment, Becca drove to Westfield Shopping Center for the first time since the confrontation. Walking through the mall where her marriage had publicly disintegrated felt like visiting a battlefield after the war had ended, but she needed to reclaim this space that had once made her feel elegant and sophisticated. Linda Parker greeted her warmly at the maternity boutique, apparently oblivious to the drama that had unfolded 3 weeks earlier. How are you feeling, honey? Linda asked, noting Becca's expanded belly. You look absolutely radiant. I'm doing well, Becca replied honestly. Better than I have in a long time, actually. She selected several nursing gowns and a beautiful going-home outfit for the baby, paying with the credit card Daniel had given her that was linked to a Sullivan Properties account. The financial security felt strange after years of carefully budgeting her teacher's salary, but she was learning to accept that her circumstances had fundamentally changed. Tommy appeared as she was leaving the boutique, his presence a reminder that she was never truly alone on Sullivan property. How did it feel coming back here? He asked as they walked toward the food court. Liberating, Becca admitted. I was afraid I'd feel humiliated again, But mostly I just feel grateful that it happened in a place where family could protect me. They passed the table where John and Amber had been sitting during their intimate lunch, and Becca felt nothing more than mild curiosity about what had become of the other woman. According to Daniel's latest report, Amber had disappeared from her expensive apartment the day after John's arrest, leaving behind most of the jewelry and clothes he had bought her. Any word on where she went? FBI thinks she's in Miami, pursuing a real estate developer who doesn't know about her history with married men, Tommy replied. She'll probably reinvent herself completely and pretend the whole thing with John never happened. Becca found herself hoping that Amber's next target would be smarter than John had been, or at least less willing to destroy his family for the illusion of passion. At the food court, she ordered a cinnamon pretzel from the same stand where she had been sitting when she first spotted John with his mistress. The elderly couple who had helped her that day, the Hendersons, were at their usual table and waved when they recognized her. "How are you doing, dear?" Mrs. Henderson asked as Becca approached their table. "We've been so worried about you since that terrible day." "I'm doing much better, thank you. This is my cousin Tommy, who works security here." "Young man, you should be very proud of how you handled that situation," Mr. Henderson said, shaking Tommy's hand. "Not many security guards would have recognized a family emergency so quickly." "The Sullivan family takes care of each other," Tommy replied with obvious pride. As they chatted, Becca realized that her story had become part of the mall's folklore. The pregnant woman whose powerful family had protected her from a cheating husband and his cruel mistress. It wasn't the legacy she would have chosen, but it was better than being remembered as a victim. Her phone buzzed with a text from Claire. "Emergency at the hospital. Rain check on lunch?" Becca replied that she understood and decided to visit grandmother Maggie instead. The estate's main house felt more like home every day, and she knew her grandmother would be eager to hear about the morning's doctor appointment. She found Maggie in the conservatory as usual, but today she wasn't alone. A distinguished man in his 50s was sitting across from her, and both of them were studying what appeared to be architectural plans spread across the tea table. "Rebecca, perfect timing," Maggie said as Becca entered. "I'd like you to meet Dr. James Morrison. He's the pediatrician who'll be caring for Margaret Rose." Dr. Morrison stood and shook Becca's hand with the warm professionalism that made the best doctors so reassuring. "Mrs. Mitchell, it's a pleasure to meet you. Your grandmother has told me so much about you and your daughter." "It's actually Ms. Sullivan again," Becca corrected gently. "I've legally reclaimed my maiden name." "Of course, Miss Sullivan. I understand you're planning to deliver at General Hospital." "That's where my obstetrician has privileges, and my best friend works there as a nurse practitioner." "Excellent choice. I have admitting privileges there as well, so I'll be able to see Margaret Rose immediately after delivery if needed." After Dr. Morrison left, Maggie explained that she had been interviewing pediatricians and had also arranged consultations with several highly recommended nannies. "I don't need a nanny, grandmother," Becca protested. "I want to take care of my daughter myself." "Of course you do, and you will," Maggie replied soothingly. "But every new mother needs support, especially when she's essentially doing it alone. A good nanny isn't there to replace you. She's there to help you be the best mother you can be." The conversation was interrupted by Daniel's arrival, his expression more serious than usual. "We need to discuss John's situation," he said without preamble. "His lawyer called Margaret this morning with a plea bargain offer." Becca felt her stomach clench. "What kind of plea bargain?" "He's willing to plead guilty to a misdemeanor fraud charge in exchange for the FBI dropping their investigation into whether he knew about Marcus's embezzlement." "That sounds reasonable," Becca said cautiously. "The catch is that he wants to include a provision requiring you to allow supervised visitation with the baby once she's born." The idea of John holding her newborn daughter while under court supervision felt surreal and disturbing. "Can he do that? Demand visitation as part of a plea bargain?" "Not technically," Daniel replied, "but his lawyer is arguing that denying him access to his child constitutes additional punishment beyond what the court has imposed." Maggie set down her teacup with the precise control that indicated she was furious. "That man has incredible nerve, using his criminal case to manipulate custody arrangements. What does Margaret think we should do?" "She wants to reject the plea bargain and force John to negotiate custody separately from his criminal case," Daniel replied. But she also wants you to understand that this could drag out for months if he decides to fight. Becca considered her options. Part of her wanted to be generous for her daughter's sake. Every child deserved to know their father if possible. But another part of her worried about exposing Margaret Rose to John's obvious instability and poor judgment. What kind of supervision are we talking about? Court-appointed monitor, probably for 2 hours every other Saturday. He'd pay for the supervision himself, and it would take place at a neutral location. For how long? Until Margaret Rose turns 18, assuming John remains current on child support and doesn't violate any court orders. The thought of dealing with John for the next 18 years felt exhausting, but Becca knew that completely cutting him out of their daughter's life might not be in Margaret Rose's best interests. "I need to think about it," she said finally. "Take your time," Daniel replied. "Margaret is stalling the prosecutor while we decide how to respond." That evening, Becca sat on her porch watching the sunset and feeling her daughter's increasingly strong movements. In 6 weeks, Margaret Rose would arrive, and every decision Becca made now would shape her daughter's future. Her phone rang with a call from an unknown number, but when she answered, the voice was familiar. "Ms. Sullivan, this is Dr. Kevin Patterson from General Hospital. I hope you don't mind me calling directly." Becca recognized the name as one of the emergency room physicians who worked with Claire. "Of course not, Dr. Patterson. Is everything all right?" "Actually, I was calling to ask if you might be interested in a teaching position. We're expanding our patient education program, and Claire mentioned that you're an elementary school teacher." "What kind of teaching?" "Health and wellness classes for new parents. The position would be part-time, flexible hours, and you could bring your baby to work if needed. The pay is significantly better than public school teaching." Becca felt a spark of excitement for the first time in weeks. The opportunity to combine her teaching skills with healthcare education while having the flexibility to care for Margaret Rose sounded almost too good to be true. "I'd definitely be interested in learning more," she said. "Wonderful. Why don't you come in next week for an informal interview? No pressure, just a chance for us to meet and discuss the possibilities." After hanging up, Becca realized that her future was beginning to take shape in ways she never could have imagined. Teaching at the hospital would give her meaningful work, financial independence, and the flexibility to raise her daughter according to her own values. For the first time since the mall confrontation, she felt genuinely excited about what came next instead of simply grateful to have survived what had come before. Margaret Rose kicked enthusiastically, as if she approved of her mother's optimistic mood. In 6 weeks, they would begin their life together, not as the wife and daughter of Jonathan Mitchell, but as two strong Sullivan women ready to face whatever challenges awaited them. Christmas morning dawned crisp and clear over the Sullivan estate, with 3 inches of fresh snow transforming the grounds into a winter wonderland that looked like something from a holiday card. 6-week-old Margaret Rose Sullivan slept peacefully in her antique bassinet, while Becca sipped coffee and watched the sunrise through the carriage house windows. The baby had arrived 2 weeks early on a snowy December morning, healthy and perfect in every way that mattered. Dr. Hayes had been right about Margaret Rose being a fighter. She had entered the world with strong lungs and an apparent determination to make her preferences known from the very beginning. John had been granted supervised visitation rights as part of his plea agreement, but he had only exercised them twice in the past month. The court-appointed supervisor reported that he seemed uncomfortable with the reality of caring for an infant and spent most of his allotted time making phone calls about his legal situation. "He's more interested in the idea of being a father than the actual work of parenting," Margaret Henley had observed after reviewing the supervisor's reports, which is probably better for Margaret Rose in the long run. Becca had started her position at General Hospital's patient education program the week before, teaching classes on infant care, breastfeeding, and postpartum wellness to new parents. The work was rewarding and flexible enough to accommodate Margaret Rose's schedule, and her colleagues treated her with the respect she had never quite felt at the elementary school. The door to the carriage house opened quietly, and Claire entered carrying a tray of Christmas morning pastries from the main house kitchen. "Merry Christmas, Mama," Claire whispered, setting the tray on the coffee table. "How did the princess sleep?" "Like an angel until 4 a.m., then like a tiny dictator until 6, Becca replied with a smile. "But she's perfect, so I can't really complain." Claire peeked into the bassinet where Margaret Rose was sleeping with her tiny fist curled near her face. The baby had inherited Becca's dark hair and the Sullivan family's distinctive blue eyes, and she was already showing signs of the strong will that characterized Sullivan women. Any word from John about Christmas visitation? His lawyer called Margaret yesterday to cancel. Apparently, he's spending the holiday in a treatment facility working on his emotional stability and decision-making skills. It was a diplomatic way of saying that John's mental health had deteriorated to the point where he needed professional help to function in daily life. The complete collapse of his business empire, combined with the revelation of Marcus's betrayal and the loss of his family, had triggered what his psychiatrist termed a severe adjustment disorder with depressive features. Is that good or bad for you? Honestly, it's a relief, Becca admitted. I want Margaret Rose to have a relationship with her father eventually, but only when he's healthy enough to be a positive influence in her life. The sound of voices from the main house indicated that the rest of the Sullivan family was beginning their Christmas morning celebrations. Becca bundled Margaret Rose in a soft cashmere blanket, a gift from grandmother Maggie, and carried her across the snowy garden to join the festivities. The main house was decorated with the kind of elegance that money and good taste could achieve, but it was also filled with the warmth of a family that genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Daniel and Tommy were building a fire in the massive stone fireplace, while Maggie supervised from her favorite armchair, and the smell of cinnamon rolls and fresh coffee filled the air. "There's my great-granddaughter," Maggie said with delight as Becca entered the living room. "Come here, sweetheart, and let me hold the most beautiful baby in the state." Becca settled Margaret Rose in Maggie's experienced arms, marveling at how naturally her grandmother had adapted to being a great-grandmother. At 75, Maggie had the energy and enthusiasm to keep up with an infant, and she clearly relished her role as the family matriarch, welcoming the next generation. "Any regrets about the way things turned out?" Daniel asked as he joined them by the fireplace. Becca considered the question seriously. 6 months ago, she had believed she was living the perfect life with a successful husband, a beautiful home, and a secure future. Now she was a single mother living in a carriage house on her family's estate, working part-time and raising a baby whose father was in psychiatric treatment. "None," she said firmly. "This is better than anything I could have planned for myself. Even without John, especially without John, I spent 8 years trying to be the perfect wife for a man who was never going to be satisfied with what he had. Now I get to focus on being the best mother I can be for someone who actually appreciates my efforts." As if to emphasize her point, Margaret Rose made the soft cooing sounds that indicated she was waking up and ready for attention. Maggie handed her back to Becca with a smile. "She knows her mama's voice," Maggie observed. "That's a sign of good bonding." Tommy appeared in the doorway of the living room, carrying a pile of wrapped presents. "These are for the newest Sullivan," he announced, "though I'm not sure a 6-week-old baby really needs this many gifts." "No, she doesn't need them," Daniel replied, "but her family needs to spoil her. It's tradition." As Becca unwrapped gifts ranging from practical baby clothes to ridiculously expensive toys that Margaret Rose wouldn't be able to use for months, she reflected on how much her life had changed since that terrible Saturday at the mall. The woman who had discovered her husband's affair while 7 months pregnant felt like a different person entirely from the confident single mother she was becoming. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Dr. Patterson. "Merry Christmas to the Sullivan ladies. Looking forward to your presentation on postpartum depression next month." The message reminded Becca that she was building a professional reputation independent of her family name or her former husband's connections. The hospital staff valued her teaching skills and her ability to connect with nervous new parents, and several doctors had mentioned opportunities for advancement within the patient education program. "What are you smiling about?" Claire asked, noting Becca's expression. "Just thinking about how different this Christmas is from what I expected a year ago." "Better or worse?" "Completely different," Becca replied. "Last Christmas, I was trying to get pregnant and worried about John's business expansion plans. I thought my biggest challenge would be morning sickness and decorating a nursery. And now? Now I'm raising a beautiful daughter, building a career I actually enjoy, and living with family who love me unconditionally. It's not the life I planned, but it's the life I want." Margaret Rose chose that moment to open her eyes and focus on her mother's face with the intense concentration that newborns brought to the simple act of recognition. Her blue eyes were alert and curious, And when Becca smiled at her, she seemed to smile back. She's going to be trouble, Daniel predicted with obvious pride. Smart, beautiful, and stubborn. Classic Sullivan woman characteristics. The best kind of trouble, Maggie added. The kind that changes the world for the better. Later that afternoon, Becca found herself walking through Westfield Shopping Center with Margaret Rose in a stroller, visiting the mall where her old life had ended and her new one had begun. The Christmas decorations were elegant and festive, and the shops were busy with post-holiday sales shoppers. Linda Parker was working at the maternity boutique despite the holiday, and she cooed over Margaret Rose with genuine enthusiasm. "She's absolutely gorgeous," Linda said. "And you look amazing. Motherhood suits you." "Thank you. It's been an adjustment, but a good one. How's your husband handling fatherhood?" Becca paused, realizing that Linda was probably one of the few people in the mall who didn't know about the dramatic events that had unfolded there 6 months earlier. "Actually, we're divorced," Becca said simply. "It's just Margaret Rose and me now." "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know." "Don't be sorry, we're both better off this way." As they talked, Becca noticed a young couple browsing the baby clothes with the nervous excitement of first-time parents. The woman was probably 7 months pregnant, and her husband was carefully examining price tags with the concentration of someone working within a strict budget. "Excuse me," Becca said to the couple. "I couldn't help but notice you're expecting. Congratulations." "Thank you," the woman replied with a radiant smile. "This is our first, so we're a little overwhelmed by all the choices. I have some gently used baby clothes at home that my daughter has already outgrown," Becca offered. "Good brands, barely worn. Would you be interested in taking a look at them?" The couple's relief was obvious. "That would be amazing," the husband said. "We're trying to budget for everything, and baby clothes are so expensive." Becca gave them her contact information and promised to call within the week. As she watched them continue their shopping with renewed enthusiasm, she realized that helping other new parents had become one of her favorite aspects of her hospital job. Walking through the food court where her confrontation with John and Amber had taken place, Becca felt no lingering trauma or embarrassment. The space had been reclaimed in her mind as simply another part of the mall where she shopped and worked, not the scene of her public humiliation. Margaret Rose dozed peacefully in her stroller, oblivious to the significance of their location. By the time she was old enough to understand the story of how her parents' marriage ended, it would be ancient history, something that had happened before her real life began. Tommy appeared as Becca was preparing to leave, making his afternoon security rounds. "Everything quiet today?" she asked. "Perfectly peaceful, just the way Christmas should be at a Sullivan property." As they talked, Becca's phone rang with a call from an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her change her mind. "Miss Sullivan, this is Dr. Rachel Kim from the Pediatric Psychology Department at Children's Hospital. I got your name from Dr. Patterson as someone who might be interested in developing educational materials for parents dealing with divorce and custody issues." The opportunity sounded intriguing and potentially lucrative, another step toward the independent career she was building. "I'd definitely be interested in hearing more," Becca replied. "Wonderful. Could you come in next week for a consultation? We're particularly interested in your perspective as someone who's navigated these challenges personally while maintaining focus on the child's well-being." After hanging up, Becca realized that her experience with John's betrayal and their subsequent divorce was becoming a professional asset rather than a personal liability. She was being sought out for her expertise in managing difficult family transitions, and her story was helping other parents navigate similar challenges. As she drove home through the snowy countryside with Margaret Rose sleeping in her car seat, Becca reflected on the circular nature of her journey. The mall where her marriage had publicly ended was now simply another place where she shopped and occasionally encountered opportunities to help other families. The woman who had believed her worth was tied to her husband's success had discovered that her real value lay in her own strength, intelligence, and capacity for growth. The devastating betrayal that had seemed like the end of her world had actually been the beginning of a life more authentic and fulfilling than anything she had experienced before. Margaret Rose stirred in her sleep, making the soft sounds that indicated she would be ready for attention soon. Becca smiled, thinking about all the adventures they would share as Margaret Rose grew from a tiny baby into a strong Sullivan woman capable of changing the world. The future stretched ahead of them, full of possibilities that had nothing to do with cheating husbands or cruel mistresses, and everything to do with the love between a mother and daughter who would face whatever came next together. As she pulled into the Sullivan Estates driveway, Becca felt the deep satisfaction of someone who had not only survived a crisis, but had emerged stronger and more purposeful than before. Margaret Rose Sullivan would grow up knowing that she came from a family of women who turned their greatest challenges into their greatest triumphs. And that, Becca thought, as she carried her sleeping daughter into their cozy carriage house, was the best Christmas gift she could give to the next generation of Sullivan women.